Our mission is to seek the truth and help people understand the world. That is also our customer proposition. And so because of that, we make choices for the mission and the business that are very synergistic.
Welcome to Behind the Numbers Brand Anatomy, the eMarketer podcast that looks under the hood of your favorite brands, made possible by Mpascal. It's April 6th, and I'm your host, Director of Insider Intelligence Marketing and Commerce Briefings, Jeremy Goldman. And this is the show that gets inside brands and dives deep into one of their recent campaigns or discusses the ROI behind a new technology they've adopted. Today we're talking with David Rubin, Chief Marketing Officer at the New York Times. Hey, David.
How you doing, Jeremy?
It's great to be with you, and here's what we have on deck for you today, listeners. First, a speed intro, where we get to know our guests in 100 seconds or less. Then, tell me what you really think, where yours truly and this week's guest discusses a few stories and themes in the news that'll be highly relevant to marketers. And then we jump into this week's case study, how the New York Times leverages brand campaigns in the name of digital transformation and growing subscriptions. All right, David, time for your speed intro, where we get to know you and see how you think on your feet. I'm excited for this 100 seconds on the clock. Our producer, Victoria, will be timing you. You ready?
Yeah, this is stressful.
Well, it's meant to be. Your time starts now. First off, what's your core mission at the New York Times?
To seek the truth and help people understand the world.
What did you want to do when you grew up, when you were a kid?
I wanted to be an astronaut.
One place where you get news other than the Times?
One place where I get news other than the Times. There are so many. Well, on my phone.
Okay, fair enough. You aren't allowed to live in New York ever again. Where do you move?
I moved to the mountains, probably Colorado.
What is your worst quality?
I can ramble.
Well, not there, apparently. You can travel back in time for 5 minutes to talk to 16-year-old you. What do you tell him?
You don't need much of a plan. It'll all work out.
The number one marketer you would want to grab a drink with?
Besides the obvious that I think wouldn't we all rather talk to somebody who isn't a marketer? I figure the longer I think, the more seconds can tick away. I would grab a drink with Taylor Swift. And I know she's not a marketer, but I think she is.
Fair enough. Your best talent that has absolutely nothing to do with marketing?
I was a diver in college.
Okay. Sounds good. I've never heard that one before.
I'm not surprised.
You pass with flying colors, so don't be too hard on yourself. That was great. Now it's time for Tell Me What You Really Think. This is the segment where I pick one or two stories in the news that'll be highly relevant to marketers and get our guests' perspective. So first off, Bettercom we covered. They were recently in trouble for, their HR practices. They fired 900 people over a Zoom call that didn't go well. And then they had layoffs that people found out about through their Workday app. And this was just an interesting story to us at Insider Intelligence because employer branding has become such an important thing amidst the Great Resignation. I was curious what you think about this story and employer branding in general.
Yeah, this may seem a little tangential, but to me, the larger thing that employer branding, and this story sort of hits on it, is just the importance of telling your story internally. Employer branding sort of makes it sound like you're trying to recruit people and talk to people who don't work for you. The thing that we're thinking a lot about here is actually talking to the people who do work for us. And if they like this experience and they get this experience, there's really multiple benefits of that. One is they do the work, right? And they can do that work better. And then also they recruit other people to come here. I mean, ultimately, candidates decide to come based on who they meet and what they think they're hearing. And so we think it starts with the experience of the people who are here. And, interestingly, in a place like this, where marketing is not the center of the organization, what role can marketing play in that? And it's been interesting to watch on the 6 years I've been here, just how we've gone from a place that never really appreciated that it had marketing, nor did it really want more marketing, to seeing what the value of that can be and how that influences the whole company. And so the story I tell on that is when we made the Truth is Hard campaign, a little bit after that came out, one of the things we did when we made the campaign is we made a bunch of buttons and t-shirts and that kind of stuff. And there were a bunch of pins that had the Truth is Hard on it. And we gave it to all the journalists. Again, this is a place that had never really internally marketed its own marketing. Also had not made a lot of thematic ads in years. And Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey, who are two of the Pulitzer Prize winning reporters behind the Harvey Weinstein coverage that we did, really seminal journalism. There's a photo that Jodi Kantor tweeted out right after the piece came out, which is the photo of them and their editors all huddled over the machine, getting ready to hit, making the final edits and going to hit go. And that photo, it's really iconic. It's an amazing photo. My guess is it'll be taught in journalism schools, 100 years from now to sort of represent this really pivotal journalism. If you come to the front of that photo, there's their cubicles and their personal effects are there. And they've actually got two of those ad pins. And not only does it say the truth is hard, but these journalists have taken a Sharpie and put really. So it says the truth is really hard. So the point is, this is an ad campaign, right? This has nothing to do with journalism in theory. And these journalists have taken our ad slogan and are using that to represent themselves and are actually sort of working off it to express themselves. And that to us is sort of how marketing is sort of influencing. We're giving them a language to something they knew about how journalism is different and better, but that they were having trouble finding the language to talk about it externally.
But what's interesting about that, and I love that example, I find that with the Great Resignation, I mean, this, I used to run a small boutique agency. I found that it was easier a few years ago, even though I could pay people a little bit below market rate, I was having an easier time recruiting then than a lot of companies are having now. And I wonder, do organizations have to compromise a little bit on finding people who are aligned with their values, just by virtue of the fact that it's so hard to get people in the door?
I think that ultimately you'll find that doesn't work, right? I mean, those people are not going to stay very long if they're not fully bought in, and so ultimately I think I think that it has to be, obviously you've got to get people when you need people, but I think we spend a lot of time trying to make sure that people understand what it is that we do here so that they can then decide if it's right for them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I want to talk to you about another story that we ran recently. There were 42 minutes of advertising from 48 brands in 72 unique spots, according to data that we covered from iSpot for the Academy Awards. And I'm not going to talk to you about the thing that everybody was talking about, which is, of course, Amy Schumer in a Spider-Man suit. That was the only thing there. No, but seriously, it's interesting because obviously you've worked and run some, TV ad campaigns, and it's interesting how everybody loves talking about how, TV is dead. And yet, even though this was not one of the biggest broadcasts that ABC had even had for the year, you still have a lot of interest in these, moments, opportunities to be part of the zeitgeist. Curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing for me is you and I were talking this a little bit at the beginning, like a lot of these prognostications you hear, TV's going to end. That may end up being largely true at some point, but usually the path to get there is pretty different than people think it's going to be. And lots of times, a lot of these things are stickier than people expect them to be. They sort of gradually, slowly come down. And, talking about us more than them, that was our experience for years with sort of print and digital. From 2000 to certainly till 2008, 2009, more like 10 or 11 or 12. I think everybody could see that digital was going to be a bigger platform for news, but we were in a spot that we had this print business that was and still remains today super important to us. And it wasn't until 2014, 2015 when we did our innovation report, which was sort of our digital strategy, sort of the beginning of our real digital first strategy. And in that, which was actually an internal document that leaked to BuzzFeed and all ironies, the document basically says that we're going to be subscription first, we're going to be consumer first. And not that we're not going to have an ad business, not that we're not going to have a print business, but that they will be behind in the strategy. And it wasn't until that happened where we really made that commitment that we were able to really unlock a lot of growth in the digital business. In some ways, sort of modest success is the biggest enemy of real success because you got too much to protect. You can't make the hard choices. You can't put your best content, your best talent into the new thing. And I think that when you look, I'm not going to say we're at the tipping point, but I think you're starting to see this sort of TV, linear and streaming. We're sort of a little bit still in the middle for some of the players with a longer history, but I still think, you can see where we're headed.
Oh, definitely. I think what's interesting is obviously you had a streamer win Best Picture for the first time. And then at the same time, it was interesting that from the iSpot data that we covered, streaming services were the biggest category as an advertiser, and streaming surged from just 12.8% of impressions in the year before. So to me, it just kind of tells me, I mean, that the definition of what TV is just going to change over time, just like the definition of what a newspaper is over time. How many people are experiencing it, with paper these days versus how they might have, 20 years ago. So it's just a transformation.
Yes, although interestingly, you're absolutely right. We have many more subscribers, factors more in that are digital only than print. Yet we still have a really healthy print business that's really important to us. I just wonder that analogy, I suspect, is going to hold for a very long time, relevant to your question. People, I think in these types of dialogues, people want to be able to say, this is gone and this is the future. And it's just not how it ever works.
Yeah, no, well said, well said. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about print and your subscription business right after the break, but we're going to take a quick word from our sponsor, Mparticle, and then we'll be right back.
At the end of the day, your customer has to be at the center of everything you do. This starts with the right customer data strategy, as well as the right foundation to solve the challenges that typically inhibit success, such as data quality, data governance, and connectivity. Mpascal is your real-time customer data infrastructure that helps you accelerate your data strategy by cleansing, visualizing, and integrating your customer data from anywhere to anywhere. Ultimately, better data leads to better decisions, better customer experiences, and better outcomes. See why the best brands choose Mpascal. Go to www.mpascal.com.
All right, now it's time for our brief case study, where we look at a recent brand campaign or deployment and discuss what went right and some lessons for next time. So first off, how would you describe the Times' mission, and how does that relate to your job as like the steward of all things marketing?
So our mission is to seek the truth and help people understand the world. Just to unpack that a little bit and sort of, I think missions usually sort of sound fairly obvious, when you hear them and you're like, yeah, it makes sense. But like what we think is sort of indicative for us is, first of all, the seek the truth part is the core journalistic mission. It's how our reporting in any category gets done. The idea that, our journalists or reporters go at the question wherever the truth may lead. They hold truth to power. They tell the story, whatever the story is, whatever the facts are. And that is our promise out to the end reader and to society, that we're going to tell that story even when that story is inconvenient. Helping people understand the world. The understanding is the key word for us. Any news source seeks to impart information or knowledge or facts, but understanding takes a little more. It probably takes, seeing more angles to something. It might take more than one story. It may take more than one format that you encounter a story from. And so for us, that's how, if you think, and it's also why it fits very well in a subscription model, where you're going to read more, you're going to engage with the product more over time. And so we think about understanding. And the world for us is the last word in that really says something. And the world really has two meanings. One is the literal. There are very few news organizations that cover as much of the geographic world as we do, have reporters in more places than we have. And it's also your world. We're covering everything from core news and politics to business to culture to cooking to games, etc.
And about a month ago, you debuted a new brand campaign, and I'm wondering what you can tell us about the Independence campaign, and how does it tie back into the mission that we just discussed?
Yeah, so Independent Truth for an Independent Life is the most recent campaign. It really fits in a long series of campaigns we've been doing all the way back to early 2017, March of 2017, when we introduced The Truth is Hard that we just talked about. All of those campaigns are really about journalism worth paying for. The thing that's interesting about the Times is that we are a business that succeeds based on paying subscribers. But unlike most businesses, most of our competitors, most of your alternatives to us, don't charge. So we're not competing against cheaper or more expensive products. We're competing against products that are literally free. Picture that in soap or hamburgers or something else, and that is literally our model. And so The thing we're trying to convey to people is that you get the quality of journalism you pay for. And if you're not paying for it, then ask yourself a question. And so all of our campaigns look at all that goes into that journalism so that you understand why it's worth paying for when you've got reasonably good free alternatives. And so what we find is by looking at that from different angles, the angle of the impact of journalism or the angle of all the obstacles that a journalist might face when they go through the work, like the truth is worth it, where this campaign looks at how quality, independent, original journalism can shape who a person is or becomes.
Totally get it. And I think it's the same struggle that we fight, frankly, just trying to figure out how do we level up as something that, we're offering to corporations, who are trying to make major decisions. How do we just constantly establish value? And I know that some of your brand campaigns over the last few years, like you just talked about, really the last 5 or so years, I feel like they've supported your brand's ongoing digital transformation. I'm wondering you can kind of talk about how you've connected the dots between the two there.
Well, the thing that's, and if there's a lesson from us that very different industries can take, the thing that we're really benefiting from, I think, is that our mission, our business, our marketing, our brand are all one thing or in one space. They're all serving the same thing. Our mission is to seek the truth and help people understand the world. That is also our customer proposition. And so because of that, we make choices for the mission and the business that are very synergistic. And the story we tell in the marketing is really just a product story. It's a story of how the journalism gets made and how it can affect you. If you're, our latest campaign is looking at how it can affect you, but ultimately most of our campaigns in the Truth Is series are really just how the sausage gets made kind of, types of advertising. We just tell them in ways that are really compelling. And, it happens that journalism is an interesting category that people want to hear how the sausage does get made. But it's really following that kind of genre.
Totally. It's interesting because I think that transparency, and it's just fortuitous the fact that this is something that is a major consumer trend where people want to see how things are made. But then to your point, they've got even greater interest in it from a journalistic standpoint. It's something that people just find, sexy as a topic, if you will. And I know that you hit a pretty major milestone semi-recently. I think was it the end of 2024 from a subscription standpoint that you started pivoting more, or I don't want to say pivoting, but started getting more digital, maybe even than non-digital subscribers?
Well, I think you mean revenue, but yes.
Yes, revenue, yes.
We have a number of those milestones have all sort of tipped. We're now, it's been true for a while, but the math is now following that, our success is in subscription, our success is in digital. We have 7.6 million subscribers, and almost more than 6.5 million of them are digital only.
And I think you have a pretty aggressive goal, unless I'm mistaken, about how many you want to hit by 2027.
Yeah, 15 million is the recently stated objective, which is roughly doubling from where we are.
So I'm sure that must have made you happy. Like, how do you hit that from where you're at now? Because obviously a lot of brand campaigns will, bring you quite a lot of awareness, but at the same time, the brand has quite a lot of awareness already. So how do you go from where you're at now to where you need to be in a few years?
Well, here's what makes us a unique industry and a unique business. There are a couple 100 million people, give or take, and it changes by month, but interact with our journalism every month. So imagine if we were a retail business, right? We have a couple 100 million people, give or take, coming in the door every day. And then we only have the 7.6 million people paying us. There's no other business that has that kind of gap, right? If the top line number is a statement of interest in our product, the way some categories would look at it, we have almost everyone is showing interest in the product, and very few people are then converting into the end subscription. Now there's limits to that, retail analogy, but it works. And so our marketing job is to close that gap. It's to show people that, the good news is you look and you say, well, heck, if there's that many people reading it, the top end of subscription number there is pretty limitless, right? It's certainly far enough there that I don't need to worry about where it stops. The job is to convince those people that they need to come and pay for it. Again, where they've got, today they're getting it for free. And so you have to show them that there is a benefit to paying for it, that there is something that they want that would make a difference. And that and I think people tend to see the news as very monolithic. They even talk about it as the news, right? And so in that model, why would you pay for one over another, particularly when the other isn't asking for money?
And I think what's interesting is, we're only a quarter of the way through the year and you've already made 2 major acquisitions. And I'm wondering, A, if you could tell us a little bit about them, but then also B, those are acquisitions that people might not necessarily associate with like that hard-hitting journalism that the Times is known for, and how, as you acquire more and more entities and you try to broaden your reach, do you have your brand stand for the same qualities as it did when it was, let's say, 10x smaller and just focused on doing a few things right?
Well, again, going back to the mission, they understand the world. And we talked about how the world means lots of things from, news, politics, geopolitics, into what do I cook for dinner? What do I buy today?
And Wordle now.
Yes, Wordle. And, a few years ago, we bought Wirecutter, the recommendations engine. It all fits in that same. So even if, you might not have guessed these specific acquisitions, and I think the two you're referring to was the acquisition of The Athletic and then Wordle, they both sort of fit that model of understanding the world. The Athletic is, a quality subscription journalism product using journalism to help people, who are fans of athletics, of the big leagues, and of specific teams. And so makes a ton of sense, I think, in that world of like they're using journalism to help people, understand their favorite sports team. And, the nice thing is the sort of demand for that journalism is pretty limitless. When you're a passionate fan of a particular club, you want to hear all about it. And The Athletic has a lot of really quality reporters who go and do that type of journalism. And they do it through a subscription model. So it ends up being relatively similar. It's an opportunity for us to create another engagement opportunity where people have to pick this up and seek out a New York Times property on a regular basis. And Wordle, so we have a subscription games product. We've had it for years. It has over 1 million subscribers to it. This is before Wordle. And Wordle fit in that it's a really quality game puzzle that a whole lot of people like to play and are passionate about. And it's just been overwhelming the amount of response and interest we've got from buying, was a relatively small acquisition. And, the role it plays, though, is the same role we were already playing, which was to give people quality games and puzzles that they want.
Yeah, I was going to say, from a stickiness standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. I wanted to ask you, just because I know we've got to let you go in a second, for your parting shot, something that we just surprise everybody with just to put them on the spot. What is one brand you particularly admire and you draw inspiration from?
So one is I have a pandemic puppy. I guess he's not a puppy anymore. He's turning 2, but we had a rescue that we got at the beginning of the pandemic. And so, Chewy is a brand that was not on my radar that, I knew what it was, but like is now like the center of my life. So just the way that they have infiltrated that and provided the service, that again, before I was in that community, I wasn't, didn't have the same relationship with.
Well, that was great. It's always a pleasure, David. Thank you so much for making the time.
Jeremy, it's really awesome to talk to you. Thanks for the opportunity.
And that's all the time we have for today's episode. Let us know what you think. We'd love to hear from you at podcast@emarketer.com. I'll be back in 2 weeks for another episode of the Behind the Numbers Brand Anatomy. Make sure to tune in tomorrow for the Behind the Numbers Daily, an eMarketer podcast made possible by Mpascal.